We had been married for 2.5 years, Sean and I, and we never took vacations. Not since our honeymoon in Greece after the wedding. Sean was a psychiatrist and loved his job. He was so committed to his work and his patients, and that's what made me fall for him in the first place. His ambition and care for others. Sean was never around much anymore. He started to spend less time at home, and even when he was there, he was always too busy to spend time with me. "Another time, George," he would say, sighing from exhaustion. And my constant nagging and need for attention, I'm not ashamed to admit I was needy. "Seriously, Sean, it's like I'm living with a stranger. Something needs to change." After nights of sitting and sleeping alone with him, I was surprised when he came home one night and said, "Let's go on a vacation." At first, I thought he was joking, so I ignored it, passed it off as an attempt to humor me and keep me sweet. But the next day, he was insistent. It was nice that Sean was suddenly taking an interest, but I was also suspicious why. I didn't directly question him. I didn't want to dampen his efforts. He was trying, and that's all that mattered. "Hiking," he said to my complete surprise. "It gives us a chance to just be, I don't know, together for a few days. I think we need it, wouldn't you agree?" It was ambitious, hiking, I mean. Sean had never shown any interest in the great outdoors, let alone hiking. And he was so particular about his hygiene. I couldn't imagine him lasting 2 minutes in the wilderness without a power shower and his creature comforts. Okay, I said, and given into his repeated attempts. He had finally talked me into it, so I tried to be optimistic. "It'll be great. Exciting even." "I can't wait," Sean said, before kissing me for the first time in months. It felt like things were beginning to change. I left the planning and purchasing of camping gear to Sean, mostly because I had no idea what we would actually need, and secondly, to see if he would actually follow through with it. My best friend Darcy couldn't believe it when I told her. "Why the change of heart?" she said. "You've suggested a vacation so many times and he's dismissed every single one. And hiking, rather you than me, dude." Darcy hated Sean. She had never outright told me, but she didn't need to. I saw it in her distaste for his cool, somber attitude, his negligence of our relationship, and the way he dismissed her whenever she was around. "I think he's scared of losing me," I said, convincing myself more than her. Never one for skirting around the truth. I could tell by Darcy's slight smile that she didn't agree. "I still think he's getting it in with someone else." I rolled my eyes. I was sick of hearing that accusation. About a year ago, Darcy saw Sean with another guy at a restaurant. They were cozy, content, and immersed in each other. She even managed to take pictures undetected. They proved nothing, and she saw nothing. Darcy knew of the guy Sean was with, a friend of a friend, something like that, and said he was just a young guy who flipped burgers at a food stand. Not exactly someone Sean would be networking or associating with. I never told Sean. I thought maybe it was one of his patients. A golden rule you don't break is being social with patients, though, as Sean had told me years ago. But maybe there was a reason for it, or maybe I just refused to believe it. I was at home, pre-packing the car the night before we were due to leave for our trip. Perhaps it was the excitement of getting away, or my general anxiety of doing something I had never done before, but I thought it was best to be organized. Sean was at the office. He told me that he needed to finalize a few things and make sure his patients were aware that he would be absent for a week. I received a phone call from Darcy after I loaded the car. "Don't go anywhere with him," she said, sounding insistent. "What, Darcy? What do you even—" She cut me off. "George, I'm pretty sure that Sean isn't who he says he is." The revelation did nothing for me. No shock value, no concern either. It just sounded like another one of Darcy's attacks on Sean. I've known Sean for 4 years, Darcy. I think I know him pretty well. What are you even talking about? My friend Sabrina, she's good friends with Tommy, the burger boy. You know, the one that I saw Sean with. Yeah? I already knew where this was going. Tommy's dead, George. He was murdered. I scoffed and then began to laugh. I'm serious, George. You need to get the heck out of there, Darcy yelled. You're being ridiculous, Darcy. I know you don't like him, but... They were in a relationship for a year. Sabrina told me everything. Said he was violent with him, and oh, for crap's sake, open your eyes, George. I had had enough. Goodbye, Darcy, I said before I hung up. We set off at 5 a.m. the next morning. I was pretty restless most of the night. I thought about how low it was of Darcy to bring a recently murdered boy into my marital problems, and her personal resentment of Sean. I couldn't imagine what Tommy's friends and family were going through. I read up on the mountain, I said to Sean as he drove us out of town. Grasmere Mountain was 4 hours away from home, and with how I felt that morning, it didn't seem far enough. That's good. Anything interesting? He said, concentrating mostly on the empty road. There's a lot of trails, has a lot of wooded areas around it. There are streams and little brooks too. It looks beautiful. It was a good suggestion. Sean nodded. Great. It wasn't great. It was just a standard mountain, something I didn't really have interest in. But I wanted to think about anything else other than my husband being associated with someone who was just murdered. The next thing I said, admittedly, spooked me out when I read about it. Apparently there's an urban legend about Grasmere. Years ago, if you went up the mountain, then you never came back down. Well, let's hope that's not true, Sean said with a smile. We were well into the main trail by midday. The sun was hot and it made me sweat profusely. Those extra pounds I had gained at the turn of my 30s didn't do me any favors. I saw that Sean struggled too. We had spent most of the journey up barely speaking. Only small talk, polite conversation. Do you want to take a break? I asked him in between panting. No, come on, it's not much further. How do you know? I don't, he said with a grin. It was the most animated I had seen him in a long time. I started to feel a lot more positive that doing this was a good idea when I saw him look like he was enjoying himself. Eventually, we were on level ground and finally took some time out. Part of me regretted coming to Grasmere because my dodgy knee was flaring up from the hike up, but the other part of me enjoyed the rush and achievement of making it up so high. There was still more to explore, but Sean and I decided to lay our roots down and set up camp. Are you sure we have enough food and water? I asked as I unpacked the minimal amount of food there was. It was Sean who had packed the essentials in there. He scowled at me. His mood had changed since we came off the trail. Yeah, I know what I'm doing, George. I'm not an idiot. I was just making sure. He appeared to be preoccupied with his thoughts as we set up the area with our tent and such. He was repetitively impatient and short with me too. Let's go for a walk, I suggested. Sean scoffed. Haven't we done enough walking? Well, we are on a walking holiday. He shook his head and looked disgusted at the suggestion. I'm fine here, you can do what you want. I had had enough of his attitude. Sean, what the heck is wrong with you? He sat up from the log that he was resting on and swung both his arms backwards and forwards like he was about to do a warm-up for a workout. The smirk on his face chilled me. Nothing. I'm at peace, George. And he said this whilst looking down his nose at me, like I was lower than him. At peace. What an odd thing to say, I thought. I didn't say anything else to him. I decided to walk away. I wasn't prepared to start an argument in the middle of nowhere, high up on a mountain of all places. The last thing we both needed was to be at war when we were stuck with each other. The woods felt damp and smelt of fresh rain, which was unusual considering the temperature the sun cast onto the ground and the clear skies above. I wondered if Sean acted dismissive because of what Darcy said to me the night before. If he was seeing that Tommy boy like she had claimed, then maybe he was grieving, felt guilty even about it. Maybe he was in love with him, or maybe it just wasn't true. I was confused, but what was clear to me was that going on the trip was going to make or break our marriage. I had a feeling that it would be the latter, but I made a commitment when I took my vows, something I took seriously, considering how long it took us to have the right to marry. I tried my best, but I had exhausted every option. I was tired of trying. Suddenly, I heard some twigs snap behind me. I ignored it the first time, but then I heard some more snapping closer to me. "Sean?" I called out, but there was no one there. Probably just a squirrel or something, I thought. I pulled my phone out and considered calling Darcy to apologize. I hated arguing with her. However, there was absolutely no signal, to my chagrin. Of course, I sighed on my phone. I was surprised that she didn't text me or attempt to call me again after I hung up on her the night before. She was usually persistent when it came to getting her point across. When I walked back to our tent, my phone vibrated. Several text messages and missed calls from various people. A couple of friends, and to my surprise, Darcy's dad, who had left me a voicemail. Before reading the messages, I went straight to his voicemail with my heart in my mouth. For her dad to call, something had to be up. When I hit play, it was fuzzy, barely audible.
"George."
He was distressed. I could hear it in his voice.
"It's Jeff."
He broke down sobbing, and it was hard to hear a tough man like him cry. It only made my anxiety grow.
"She's been killed. Someone murdered my little girl. Oh, where are you? Please call me."
As soon as the voicemail finished, it was like someone had punched me in the stomach. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even cry. All the sounds around me sharpened, making my eyes ring. I went completely numb. It took me a minute before I ran back to meet Sean. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice one note, his face unfazed. I was out of breath. I could feel the color draining from my face, but he didn't seem concerned. In fact, he sat with a calm poise. "We need to go back," I said, pointing to where we had entered, trembling all over. He cocked his head. "Why would I want to do that?" "Darcy's been killed. Someone murdered her." Sean stood up, rubbing his knees as he did so. He cocked his head again. "I know, babe." His tone made me freeze. He looked like a completely different person. No remorse, no urgency. "What? What do you mean you know?" Sean sneered and then showed me his teeth. "Haven't you worked it out yet, George? Are you really as dumb as you make out? Your little BFF knew, didn't she? She just couldn't leave it alone." I wasn't dumb. I knew exactly what he was alluding to and what he was confessing. I just didn't want to wake up from it. It was all a bad dream. I knew Sean, and I knew that he couldn't have done that. Not to Darcy or Tommy. Not anybody. He helped people for a living. That's what he did. He cared. But I had to wake up and face it. "The boy too?" I asked. He confirmed it with a nod. "Why?" I sighed. Sean put a hand behind his back and retrieved a knife from his belt. His mouth slowly spread into a dirty, menacing grin. "Because I like it." I didn't give myself any time to think. I just spun on my heels and ran like heck. I heard his own feet crunch the leaves. He was in pursuit of me, sprinting not too far behind. I dared myself to look back. Sean's face was crimson. The sweat dripped off him and settled into little drops on his t-shirt. I couldn't get over the hunger in his eyes, the desire, like a predator chasing its prey. That's what I was to him. I directed my eyes to the knife in his hand, watched the way that it swayed back and forth, and reflected the glistening sun. I imagined it piercing my skin. I imagined him slitting my throat with it. I lost my concentration by glaring at the knife. Didn't pay attention to where I was running. My sneaker stubbed a hard spot in the ground, and I hit my knee before the rest of me toppled onto the floor. The pain in my knee was excruciating, but I pushed past it and steadied myself back up, ready to continue running. I was too late. He pushed me back down, so I fell on my chin this time. Just as quickly, he turned me over to face him. His eyes widened with satisfaction as he rested his heavy weight onto my stomach. "Sean, don't. This isn't you. I love you." My pleading was lost in him. He raised the knife up as I tried to struggle. "What a shame." And that was the last thing Sean ever said to me. I didn't see it behind Sean. It must have waited patiently, maybe even witnessed the whole thing. Sean's blood splattered onto my face and my shirt. The sensation of it hitting my face made me close my eyes. I felt like they were closed longer than they actually were. The blackness was comforting for those few seconds. I guess it's true what they say. When you think you're going to die, your whole life does flash before your eyes. And I had been an idiot. I should have left Sean a long time ago. I should have listened to Darcy. It was only when I opened my eyes that I saw the pickaxe went directly through the side of his head. His eyes were still open. His body seized uncontrollably for a few seconds before it finally went limp. And then I saw his body raise above me with the strength of the pickaxe. He was tossed to the side like a rag doll. His head came off the pickaxe like meat on a bone. I slowly turned my head to face it. It was at least 8 foot, and looked like every dark, inescapable nightmare I had ever had. The nightmare looked like a man by stature, but whatever it was not human. Its skin was a boiled pink, scattered with purple intrusions pulsating like thick veins. The face, it was blank. No eyes. The skeletal structure of a nose peeked through, and a mouth scattered with the odd fang. The fangs dripped with saliva. I was prey again. In the time it took for me to register it and take in its harrowing presence, I saw the pickaxe raised above me. Before it could strike down directly onto my groin, I got up and ran away. It didn't follow. I didn't know precisely how long I had been running for. It could have been 5 minutes or half an hour. I wasn't keeping track. It was enough to make my mouth dry enough to heave. I had also developed a wheeze like I had just smoked several packs of cigarettes. I finally acknowledged the throbbing pain in my knee. Before I even rubbed it, I felt the fiery heat that radiated from it. I took a gamble that I was far enough from the nightmare that I could attempt to call mountain rescue. No signal, but I called 911 regardless. Nothing. Instant disconnection. For Pete's sake, I said to myself. Then it occurred to me that instead of running down the mountain, I'd continue going up. I had hoped that I hadn't gone too far up that I didn't lose my bearings if I attempted to get back down. And hopefully, I'd also find a signal along the way. Limping and trying to use my good leg to move, I took a look around. The coast was clear. I made use of the trees and tried to be as incognito as possible. I noticed a trail and made a plan to follow it. If I could get down as far as possible, maybe it'll lead me down the mountain again and I can make a run for it. I was about to put my plan into action when the nightmare emerged from a tree. It stood there before me and it waited patiently. Even though it appeared to be blind, it could see me and sense me, that much I knew. I thought about which direction to go to run. I gave a sideways glance to my left and saw there was a hill down below. I couldn't see how low down it was from where I stood. For all I knew, it could have been a long drop. I had to act fast. It began to move and lifted the pickaxe up. It was ready to pounce. I had no choice. I had to take the chance. I sprinted to my left as it mimicked my movement. I couldn't believe the speed that it had. I thought I would make it, and the nightmare got closer and swung the pickaxe. It was inches from my head when I jumped below. I felt the ground on the tips of my fingers, moist. Probably what had saved my life from the high jump. The impact when I rolled down the hill didn't do my limbs any favors. I pushed myself up and winced from the pain all over. I was lucky I didn't break anything. I got my bearings and wiped my stinging lip. Blood. I felt these split with my tongue, which was like putting salt on it. I couldn't believe my eyes when the thing stood in the path before me. "You've got to be kidding me," I said as I attempted to run in the opposite direction. My legs wouldn't let me run anymore. All I managed was a pathetic limp. I thought I was done for good this time. "Really? You're still trying to run?" I went cold when I recognized the voice. I turned to see Sean standing there instead of the nightmare, his arms folded, his lip curled, smug and completely unarmed. It was impossible. "You're dead," I said. "I watched you die." He tutted, shook his finger. "I'm not dead," Sean said, and proceeded to poke his finger into the side of his skull, directly where I watched it get impaled. "I'm here. You always have me in your head, especially now you know who I really am. You're weak, George." Sean approached me and I didn't back away. I couldn't believe he was alive. "You're dead," I repeated, standing my ground. "What will you do now that you have no one else to love you? I'm dead, Darcy's dead. Who else do you have?" He was inches away now. The apparition of Sean. It wasn't him. It wasn't the man that I had loved. I didn't fear him and his cruel words. Even though it embodied him, probably spoke his true feelings, I wasn't fazed by them. Sean, my husband, a murderer, was dead and couldn't hurt anyone else. Not even me. Sean's apparition raised the nightmare's pickaxe. It came out of nowhere. It went to swing it. But before it could, I grabbed the wooden handle with all the strength that I had left in me. "I have me," I said, looking into the eyes of my dead husband's doppelganger. I thrusted the pickaxe from his hands and it hit it in the head. It was Sean who fell to the floor, but on the ground, the nightmare lay still. Blood started to spill from its skull, and it trickled like a stream on the ground. It took me a while to find the original trail that we had come up on. I limped down it, aching all over, pain stabbing at my nerves. After a while, I found a signal and I called 911. When I eventually got to the bottom, the rescue team were there to meet me. I took one last look at the landscape of Grasmere Mountain. In the night sky, it looked haunting and deathly. They never found Sean's body.